The U.S. government's interest payment on its debt is now $1.2 trillion a year, more than the entire defense budget. The debt ceiling has been raised over 100 times. There are 6 mathematical facts about this balance sheet that nobody in Washington will say out loud. So check this out.
Here's what nobody's talking about. While everyone was watching missiles, the annual interest payment on the national debt quietly crossed $1 trillion for the first time in American history. No press conference, no presidential address, no emergency session. $1 trillion in interest, more than the entire defense budget. And Washington treated it like a rounding error. The Iran war didn't create that number, but every carrier group deployment, every fuel subsidy, every emergency defense dollar, all of it borrowed. All of it added to a balance sheet that was already in a death spiral before the first strike. Ray Dalio has spent 50 years studying how countries go broke. Not think pieces, not opinion columns, 48 countries across 500 years of data. He found the same cycle every time. He calls it the big debt cycle. Runs about 75 years, 6 stages. 3 weeks ago, he wrote in Fortune that America just entered stage 6. The last time stage 6 ran was 1929 through 1945. That's where we are. What that means for every dollar you've saved, that's the rest of this video. The current administration can't fix this. Neither could the last one. Neither could the one before that. This isn't about who's in office. The balance sheet passed the point where policy could have changed the outcome years ago. What's left is how you position before the math finishes running. Federal spending runs about $7 trillion a year. Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt. Those 3 eat the majority of it. They're mandatory. They grow automatically. Congress doesn't vote on them. The part they actually argue about, discretionary spending, you could zero it out completely and still not close the deficit. That's how far gone the spending side is. The debt ceiling's been raised over 100 times since 1944. 100. Not once has Congress said no. Because the alternative, telling 65 million Social Security recipients their checks are getting smaller, ends careers. So they raise it every time. And the debt grows every time. Here's scale. Every billionaire in America, all 902 of them, has a combined net worth of about $6.8 trillion. Take all of it, not tax it, confiscate it. You can't run the federal government for a single year. That's the gap. There aren't enough rich people on earth to close it with taxation. The only financing mechanism left is borrowing. And that's exactly what they're doing, at a pace of $2 trillion a year for the next decade. CBO's projection, not mine. Now look at the structure of the debt. 33% of all publicly held Treasury debt matures within 12 months. When it matures, it rolls over at today's rates. 5 years ago, the average rate on government debt was 1.5%. Today, it's 3.365. Every old cheap bond that expires comes back expensive, automatically, on a schedule nobody voted for and nobody can stop. The CBO published what happens next. Interest costs double to $2.1 trillion by 2036. Interest exceeds Medicare by 2028, exceeds defense by 2038. By 2048, it's the single largest thing the government spends money on. More than Social Security, more than anything. The United States government spending more to service past mistakes than to build anything going forward. In 2020, the interest payment was $345 billion. 5 years later, $970 billion, nearly tripled. And through the first 5 months of this fiscal year, it's running 7.2% higher than last year. This isn't stabilizing, it's accelerating. Interest creates debt. Debt creates interest. The loop feeds itself. That's what a spiral looks like from the inside. Put it at the household level. Your share of the national debt, every household share, is $289,000. Median household income is $80,610. 3.6 years of everything you earn before taxes, before rent, before food. That's your tab for a debt you never agreed to carry.
Hey, real quick, if you've liked this video so far and you want to know how to make videos like this quickly and easily, I've got something you're going to love. I built a course that teaches you exactly how to grow a faceless YouTube channel in just a few hours a week, how to monetize it, how to gain consistent followers, and how to do all of it without any guesswork. Even if you've got zero video experience, this is your opportunity to build real passive income from YouTube using AI tools that does the heavy lifting for you. Everything you need is in the link below. So now let's get back to the video.
The Federal Reserve is supposed to be the release valve. Cut rates and the interest becomes manageable. But here's the trap, and Dalio documented this same trap in every one of those 48 countries. Rate cuts push more money into the system. More money means higher prices. Higher prices mean the Fed has to raise rates to contain inflation. Higher rates make the interest more expensive. More expensive interest means more borrowing. More borrowing means more debt. Fix one side, break the other. There's no clean exit. Dalio found 4 options available to governments at this point. Cut spending, politically impossible. Default, catastrophic for the reserve currency. Tax the wealthy, too slow and too small. Or print money. Create new dollars to pay old obligations. Make the debt smaller by making the currency lighter. 48 countries, 500 years. Every single one that reached this point chose option 4. Not most, all of them. Because printing is the only option that doesn't require a vote, doesn't trigger an immediate crisis, and doesn't end a political career. It just quietly makes every existing dollar worth less. The evidence that it's already happening is sitting in the open. The dollar index fell 11% in the first half of 2025. Biggest drop since '73. Morgan Stanley called for another 10% decline by the end of 2026. Gumlock at DoubleLine told CNBC the dollar hasn't been acting like a safe haven for a while. Foreign central banks have been net sellers of treasuries since 2022. The reliable sovereign buyers who showed up at every auction for decades, they're stepping back. The new marginal buyer is leveraged hedge funds running short-term basis trades. That's not confidence. That's speculation dressed in a suit. JP Morgan labeled the institutional shift out of dollar assets the debasement trade. The largest financial institutions on earth are repositioning around the assumption that the dollar will keep losing value. They're not debating if, they're debating how fast. Here's what that word actually means. Debasement. The government owes $39 trillion. It'll never pay it back, honestly. The only way to shrink that number is to shrink the unit it's measured in. Pay creditors back in dollars that buy less. They get the number on the contract. They just can't buy as much with it. Your savings account doesn't go down. The rent goes up. The groceries go up. The insurance goes up. The balance looks the same. What it purchases gets smaller every year. It feels like prices are rising. What's actually happening is the ruler is shrinking. The dollar's lost 96% of its purchasing power since Nixon closed the gold window in '71. 96%. That's not a projection. That's the scoreboard. Dalio traced this pattern back through centuries. The Dutch guilder, the British pound, the Spanish real. Every reserve currency in history followed the same arc. Debt built over generations. Confidence held longer than the math justified. Then the gap between confidence and reality closed fast. And the people holding that currency absorbed the loss. America's share of global reserves has dropped from 71% in 2000 to 57% today. 15 points in 25 years. The trajectory isn't so. Britain was the world's reserve currency in 1914. By '76, it needed an IMF bailout. 60 years. Nobody standing in London in 1920 thought the pound would collapse. It did. Not because of one war or one policy, because the math accumulated until it couldn't be ignored anymore. The Iran war didn't start this spiral. It was running long before the first missile. But every dollar of emergency spending, borrowed, moved the timeline forward. The fiscal damage from this war will outlast the ceasefire by years, possibly decades. That's what borrowed wars do. They don't end when the fighting stops. They end when the bill is paid. And this bill won't be paid. It'll be inflated away. Every country that went through stage 6 in Dalio's research had people who came out the other side with their wealth intact. They weren't lucky, they weren't connected, they studied the cycle before it completed. They understood that wealth doesn't disappear during debasement, it transfers. From the people holding currency to the people holding what the currency is losing value against. The ones who came through it weren't buying everything in sight, hoping something worked. They were surgical. They knew what performs in this specific phase, not the last one, not the next one, this one. They studied what held value when the Dutch guilder broke, when the pound broke, when the Argentine peso broke. The assets were different. The principle was the same. Hard assets, productive assets, things that can't be printed. You need to be a sniper right now, not a shotgun. The downturn that's forming isn't just a threat, it's a transfer. And the people who study the mechanics of that transfer before it completes are the ones who capitalize on it. Not by panicking, not by guessing, by knowing exactly what they own and why they own it in this specific environment. You're watching this before the confirmation, before the headline catches up to what the balance sheet already shows. That's the window. Share this with someone who thinks the ceasefire fixed it. Share it with someone sitting in cash thinking the number in their account means they're safe. The math doesn't care about the ceasefire, doesn't care who's president, doesn't care what the Treasury Secretary says while the dollar keeps falling. 39 trillion in debt, 1 trillion in interest, a war's borrowed tab still compounding, 500 years of history pointing in one direction. The spiral doesn't stop because someone signed a piece of paper in the Middle East. It stops when the math runs out of room. And right now, it's still running.